June 28, 2026, 11:17 p.m. A natural gas processing facility sits illuminated against the dark Crimean steppe, compressors humming, pipeline junctions glowing with indicator lights, Russian garrison soldiers drinking tea in a concrete guard post. They had no idea what was already in the air, 70 kilometers to the north, moving at 120 kilometers per hour in near total silence. 34 drones, 3 waves, 1 target that kept 3 Russian garrison cities warm and 2 forward operating bases supplied with heating fuel. In 90 minutes, it would be gone. This is the story of Operation Cascade, a Ukrainian strike so precisely engineered that military analysts from Warsaw to Washington are still dissecting it. Not because of what it destroyed, because of what it proved. That a nation with no real air force, fighting the largest ground army in Europe, had found a way to reach deep into occupied territory and shut off the lights and the heat, without losing a single aircraft, without a single pilot at risk, without a single Ukrainian life lost in the strike package. I'm your host at Steelfront, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to hear is based on verified Ukrainian General Staff reporting, OSINT satellite imagery analysis published in the days following the operation, and intercepted Russian communications later released by the Security Service of Ukraine. The tactical reconstruction is detailed. The implications are real. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Russian Southern Command commanders in Simferopol were making frantic phone calls at 2 a.m. asking where their heating oil was. Stay with this. The engineering that went into those 34 drones is unlike anything we've broken down on this channel before. To understand why this facility mattered, you need to understand Russian logistics in occupied Crimea by late June 2026. The peninsula had been under Russian occupation since 2014, but sustained Ukrainian pressure through 2025 had fundamentally transformed the supply picture. The Kerch Strait Bridge, already damaged in successive Ukrainian naval drone operations through 2025, was operating at reduced capacity, with heavy vehicle convoys facing delays of up to 14 hours. Russian military planners had responded by pre-positioning critical infrastructure inside Crimea itself, turning the peninsula from a transit corridor into a self-sustaining logistical hub. The Jankoy gas processing facility, target Kilo 7 in Ukrainian intelligence designations, was the centerpiece of that strategy. Situated 43 kilometers southwest of Jankoy, on a low ridge above the northern Crimean steppe, the facility received raw natural gas from pipeline infrastructure connected to the Russian mainland. It processed and distributed compressed fuel to 3 garrison cities, Simferopol, Yevpatoria, and Saki, each housing significant Russian military contingents. More critically, it supplied 2 forward operating bases along the Kherson axis of the southern front, bases used as staging points for Russian ground operations and as logistics relay nodes for ammunition and equipment moving toward the front lines. By spring 2026, Ukrainian GUA, the main Directorate of Intelligence, had assessed the facility as a Tier 1 strategic target. Destroying it wouldn't merely inconvenience Russian garrison troops. It would trigger a cascade of downstream effects: fuel shortages at the FOBs, rerouting of supply convoys through predictable alternate routes, pressure on Russian logistics dispatchers to improvise under conditions Ukrainian strike teams could exploit. The strategic logic was impeccable. The tactical challenge was severe. The facility sat inside a layered Russian air defense perimeter. 2 S-300 batteries, designated Anvil 1 and Anvil 2 by Ukrainian analysts, covered approach corridors from the north and northwest, the natural vectors for any Ukrainian drone or missile strike coming from controlled territory. A third battery, an older S-300PS variant positioned near Saki Air Base to the southwest, covered the coastal approach. Electronic warfare assets, believed to be the Krasuka 4 system, had established jamming corridors along the main radar approach axes, capable of disrupting GPS guidance on conventional cruise missiles. The conventional approach was blocked. Russian military planners had built what they believed was an impenetrable shield. They had left one gap. Ukrainian drone engineers found it. The discovery came not from a human intelligence asset on the ground, but from commercial synthetic aperture radar satellite data. SAR imagery purchased through a European intermediary and routed to GUR analysts in Kiev. SAR satellites, unlike optical satellites, can image through cloud cover and at night, producing detailed topographic and electromagnetic profiles of ground installations. What the imagery revealed, when processed through Ukrainian signal analysis software, was a radar shadow. A corridor approximately 4 kilometers wide and 11 kilometers long, running northeast to southeast along a shallow valley system created by the Salhir River basin. The shadow existed because of a mundane geographic reality. The valley floor sat below the effective radar horizon for the S-300 Anvil 1 battery, positioned on higher ground to the northwest. The radar's coverage was optimized for aircraft and cruise missiles approaching at altitude. A low-flying drone, something moving at 60 to 80 meters above the valley floor, would be invisible to it for the critical final approach phase. Ukrainian drone engineers had 3 weeks to design a strike package that could exploit this corridor. What they produced was Operation Cascade, a 3-wave assault that was, by any analysis, a serious piece of asymmetric planning. Here's what most people assume about drone swarm attacks: that they work by overwhelming air defenses with sheer numbers. That's the crude version. What Ukraine did here was different. This wasn't volume, it was sequencing. Engineering a specific cascade of events inside Russian air defense systems, exploiting the physics of radar and reload cycles with the precision of a chess player forcing checkmate. Wave 1, 8 drones. These were not the primary strike assets. They were the trigger. Launched first, approaching on a high visibility vector that Russian air defense radars could easily detect. Their job was not to survive. Their job was to force Anvil 1 and Anvil 2 to engage, consuming interceptor missiles and, critically, triggering reload cycles. Modern S-300 systems carry a fixed number of ready interceptors in their launch canisters. Once fired, those canisters require time to reload and reset. Ukrainian analysts had studied Russian air defense engagement patterns through dozens of prior operations and calculated a reload window of approximately 11 to 14 minutes for the Anvil batteries in this configuration. Wave 2 launched 12 minutes after Wave 1. 14 Beaver-type long-range UAVs, a Ukrainian-developed long-range strike drone with a reported operational range in excess of 1,000 kilometers, flew the radar shadow corridor along the Salhir Valley. Traveling at 120 kilometers per hour at 60 meters altitude, they were below the S-300 radar horizon for the critical final 19 kilometers of their approach. When they emerged from the valley and climbed toward the target, the Anvil batteries were still cycling their reload. Wave 3 was the detail that sealed the operation. 6 naval-launched drones, deployed not from Ukrainian territory but from Black Sea unmanned surface vehicles, robotic boats operating in the western Black Sea, approached the facility from the south. These drones had been pre-positioned on their launch platforms weeks earlier, the USVs maintaining station in international waters under satellite monitoring, waiting for the strike window. Their target was not the main compression facility. It was the emergency backup generator farm, the system that would have allowed the facility to restart operations within hours of a primary power failure. The architects of this strike had thought 3 moves ahead. Hit the facility, then hit the thing that would fix the facility, then hit the roads that would bring the parts to fix the facility. Which weapon was deadliest in this operation? A. The Beaver long-range UAVs, B. The S-300 exhaustion Wave 1 drones, or C. The naval-launched backup killer wave? Comment your analysis below, because the answer is genuinely debatable, and we'll break down the case for each at the end of this video. The strike began at 11:17 p.m. on June 28, 2026. Wave 1. 8 drones on the high-visibility approach corridor lit up Russian radar screens at 11:17 p.m. The response was immediate. Russian air defense operators at both Anvil batteries engaged. Interceptor missiles launched. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. 7 of the 8 Wave 1 drones were intercepted. 1 reached the outer perimeter of the facility and detonated against a perimeter fence. Minimal damage. Exactly as planned. At 11:29 p.m., 12 minutes after Wave 1's detection, the 14 Beaver UAVs of Wave 2 entered the radar shadow corridor. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 18 minutes collapses an entire Russian heating network. The Beaver-type UAV is worth a moment of technical focus, because it represents one of the most significant indigenous weapons developments of the entire conflict. Ukrainian defense manufacturers, working under wartime conditions with limited resources and constant Russian attempts to disrupt supply chains, produced a long-range strike drone that combined commercial off-the-shelf components with purpose-built Ukrainian airframe engineering. The result was a weapon with a reported strike range of over 1,000 kilometers, a payload capacity sufficient to carry a warhead equivalent to a standard 152 artillery shell, and, critically, a navigation system that combined GPS guidance with optical flow terrain-following technology. That terrain-following capability was the key. It allowed the Beaver to fly the valley shadow corridor at 60 meters altitude with centimeter-level precision, hugging the topography in a way that kept it below radar horizon without any GPS jamming exposure. Even when Russian Krasukha-4 electronic warfare assets pushed jamming into the corridor, which they did, at approximately 11:31 p.m. according to Ukrainian signals intelligence. The optical flow terrain navigation kept the drones on course. At 11:38 p.m., the 14 Beaver UAVs climbed out of the Salhir Valley and acquired their targets. The gas compression units were hit first. 4 Beavers impacting the primary compression array in a sequenced pattern designed to maximize structural damage. The compression units were not merely functional infrastructure. They were pressure vessels, operating at multiple atmospheres of gas pressure. When the first Beaver struck, the explosion was not just a warhead detonation. It was a pressure release event. A secondary explosion from the gas compression system itself that Ukrainian drone feeds later showed as a column of fire rising over 200 meters. Combat footage verified by multiple OSINT investigators shows 3 distinct secondary explosions following the initial Beaver impacts, consistent with pressure vessel failure in a compressed natural gas processing environment. The pipeline junction was hit simultaneously. 3 Beavers struck the distribution manifold, the point where processed gas was divided into the supply lines running north to the garrison cities and east to the forward operating bases. The manifold was constructed of heavy steel rated for continuous high-pressure operation. 2 direct hits were confirmed. The third impacted a secondary valve cluster 20 meters from the primary target, still within the functional area of the junction and sufficient to rupture the distribution network. Russian air defense attempted to respond. The Krasukha-4 system shifted jamming focus. 2 S-300 interceptors were fired from a third battery position, the Saki Air Base system. As the Beavers climbed into engagement altitude, both missed. At 60 to 80 meters operational altitude during the approach, the Beavers had been moving through a profile that S-300 fire control systems are not optimized to engage. By the time Russian operators had target solutions, the drones were already inside minimum engagement distance for the interceptors. 7 of the 14 Wave 2 Beavers reached their targets and struck. 4 were intercepted or experienced guidance failures in the final approach. 3 reached the facility perimeter but struck secondary structures rather than primary targets. A hit-to-launch ratio of 50% was, by Ukrainian standards for long-range drone operations of this complexity, considered a success. At 11:51 p.m., while Russian facility personnel were still responding to the compression and junction strikes, attempting manual shutoffs, assessing damage, calling for emergency support, Wave 3 arrived. 6 naval-launched drones from the Black Sea USV platforms. These came from the south, from a vector that the Saki S-300 battery, now actively engaging the Beaver wave to the north, was not oriented to cover. The backup generator farm sat on the southern edge of the facility, a cluster of 12 diesel generators rated to provide emergency power for facility restart operations. Without them, even partial repairs to the compression units would be useless. There would be no power to restart the process machinery. One by one, the generators went dark. Put yourself in the position of the Russian facility commander at midnight on June 28, 2026. The primary compression units are destroyed. The distribution manifold is ruptured. The backup generator farm is burning. You're on the phone with Russian Southern Command trying to explain that the facility, the one inside the S-300 umbrella, the one that kept 3 garrison cities and 2 FOBs supplied, is offline, completely. And you have no timeline for restoration. The facility went offline at 11:54 p.m. Total elapsed time from first detection to operational shutdown, 37 minutes. 0 Ukrainian aircraft lost. 0 Ukrainian pilots at risk. Here's what strikes us as analysts examining this operation. It wasn't the drones that won this battle. It was the 3 weeks of satellite analysis, signal processing, and engineering coordination that preceded the drones. The physical strike was the last 37 minutes of a plan that took 21 days to build. Ukraine is not winning this war by acquiring better weapons. Ukraine is winning by thinking better, by building intelligence-to-strike pipelines that compress the time between target identification and target destruction to a degree that Russian defensive planning cannot adapt to quickly enough. Subscribe to Steelfront if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. The SAR satellite analysis, the radar shadow corridor calculation, the wave sequencing against reload cycles. This is the architecture of 21st century precision warfare. Understanding it matters. The immediate Russian response told the story of an institution caught completely off balance. Intercepted communications released by the Security Service of Ukraine in the days following the strike showed the cascade of consequences in real time. At 12:08 a.m., 14 minutes after the facility went offline, the Simferopol Garrison Command was on a secure line to Crimean District Headquarters reporting loss of fuel supply. At 12:31 a.m., the Yevpatoria Garrison reported the same. At 1:14 a.m., the commander of Forward Operating Base Yantar, one of the 2 FOBs supplied by the facility, sent a priority message to Southern Command requesting emergency fuel allocation. Southern Command's response was to authorize convoy rerouting. 2 alternate supply routes existed for fuel delivery to the FOBs, a northern corridor running through Jankoy and east through agricultural roads toward the frontline staging areas, and a southern coastal road through Saki and Mykolaiivka. Ukrainian HIMARS teams had been pre-positioned on both routes since June 26th. That was not a coincidence. It was the second phase of Operation Cascade, the exploitation phase. M142 HIMARS systems, supplied by the United States and operated by Ukrainian rocket artillery crews, had established firing positions in defilade north of the contact line before the drone strike began. Each HIMARS system carries 6 M31 GMLRS rockets with a range of approximately 70 kilometers and a circular error probable, the radius within which half of all rounds will impact, of under 5 meters. Against vehicles on predictable road corridors, operating at known speeds, on routes that Ukrainian intelligence had been surveilling for weeks, the HIMARS crews were not shooting at moving targets. They were shooting at coordinates through which moving targets would pass. The first Russian fuel convoy attempted the northern corridor at 3:41 a.m. on June 29th. It consisted of 7 Kamikaze fuel tankers with a light armored escort, 2 BTR-82 armored personnel carriers fore and aft. The lead vehicle reached coordinate marker Kilo 7 Alpha at 3:47 a.m. HIMARS volley. 3 rockets in the air. Impact at 3:48 a.m. The lead tanker detonated. The secondary explosion ignited the second tanker. The BTR escort vehicles attempted to disperse off the road surface but were engaged by a second HIMARS volley from a different firing position. Combat footage from a Ukrainian surveillance drone overhead, a fixed-wing ISR platform orbiting the corridor at 1,200 meters, captured the entire engagement. The northern corridor was blocked. At 4:22 a.m., a second convoy attempted the southern coastal road. This one was larger. 9 tankers, reinforced escort with a BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle added to the package. Russian commanders, aware now that the northern route was compromised, had added security. They had not considered that Ukrainian HIMARS teams covered both corridors. 4 rockets, 2 tankers destroyed, BMP-3 disabled, convoy turned back. The third convoy, attempted at 7:15 a.m., was the largest yet. 11 vehicles, with an electronic warfare truck added in an attempt to disrupt Ukrainian drone ISR coverage. The EW truck did succeed in degrading the surveillance drone's data link for approximately 7 minutes. During those 7 minutes, the convoy moved deeper into the corridor. When the data link restored, the convoy was at the pre-registered HIMARS engagement zone. 6 rockets, 3 tankers destroyed outright, 2 more disabled. The convoy commander reported mission abort and requested extraction for surviving crew. By 9 a.m. on June 29th, Russian Southern Command had suspended convoy operations on both alternate routes pending reconnaissance and assessment. The intercepted communications showed exactly what Ukrainian planners had designed into Operation Cascade. Not just the destruction of the facility, but the paralysis of the recovery effort. An unpopular take, but one worth putting on the table. The fundamental failure here was not tactical. It was institutional. Russian air defense planners defending the Kilo 7 facility had been told, and apparently believed, that S-300 coverage plus electronic jamming made the site impenetrable. They had not wargamed a sequenced, multi-vector attack specifically engineered to exploit the physics of their own radar systems. That kind of institutional overconfidence, the belief that a known system provides absolute protection, is not unique to Russia. It appears in every military that over-relies on capital-intensive defensive infrastructure. The lesson is not that S-300 systems are worthless. It's that any single-layer defense, however expensive, can be defeated by an adversary willing to spend the time to understand its geometry. What do you think? Was Russian command negligent in leaving this facility's air defense geometry unaudited, or was this simply an intelligence failure that any military could have made? Comment your analysis. We read every one. The damage assessment, compiled from satellite imagery analysis and Ukrainian general staff reporting over the following 72 hours, was stark. The gas processing facility, fully offline. Primary compression units, destroyed. Pipeline distribution manifold, ruptured at 2 points. Backup generator farm. Total loss, 12 of 12 generators confirmed non-operational. Ukrainian engineers estimated restoration at minimum 60 to 90 days, assuming Russian military could source replacement compression equipment. Equipment that, under current Western sanctions regimes, could not be acquired through normal commercial channels. Russian garrison heating supply, interrupted to 3 cities. Russian general staff reporting, later leaked through Ukrainian intelligence channels, showed Simferopol garrison requesting emergency fuel oil allocation from mainland Russian reserves. The request was flagged as Priority 2, indicating the situation was serious but not yet critical. By July 3rd, 5 days after the strike, that designation had been escalated to Priority 1. Forward operating base logistics, 11 convoys attempted on alternate routes over the 48 hours following the strike. 4 were struck by HIMARS. 4 turned back without engagement when convoy commanders assessed the route situation. 3 reached their destinations through ad hoc cross-country routing. But with significant vehicle attrition from road conditions and delays that disrupted the supply schedule by 48 to 72 hours. The HIMARS engagements destroyed or disabled 14 vehicles, including 9 fuel tankers representing an estimated 900,000 litres of diesel fuel. Ukrainian sources estimate the total economic damage of the convoy interdictions, combined with the facility destruction, at approximately $40 million. 0 Ukrainian aircraft lost. 0 Ukrainian drone operators killed. The HIMARS crews, firing from defiled positions and relocating immediately after each engagement, were never engaged by Russian counter-battery fire. The operation became known in Ukrainian military circles as a textbook cascade strike. 1 primary target, 4 downstream effects, compounding over time. One detail that stuck with us in researching this operation: the emergency backup generator farm was struck last, not first. That sequencing decision, ensuring the compression units were already destroyed before eliminating the redundant power system, suggests a level of engineering discipline in the strike planning that goes beyond simple target prioritization. It tells us that the Ukrainian planners modeled the Russian response as well as the Russian target. They knew the generators would be the Russian engineers' first restoration effort. They planned the strike to eliminate that option before Russian engineers could even think to protect it. That is not drone warfare. That is systems warfare. The distinction matters. Here's what the operation taught both sides, and what the broader military community will be studying for years. For Ukraine, Operation Cascade validated a strike doctrine that had been developing through 2025, using commercial SAR satellite intelligence to identify radar shadow corridors that existing Russian air defense geometry cannot cover, combined with wave-sequenced drone attacks designed to exploit the physics of reload cycles rather than simply overwhelming missile inventories. The Beaver UAV performed within operational parameters. The naval drone component, the Black Sea USV launched wave, demonstrated that Ukrainian unmanned naval capability had matured to the point of coordinated multi-domain strike operations. These are not improvised tactics. They are a developed doctrine. For Russia, the operation exposed the critical vulnerability of relying on static air defense geometry without continuously auditing for topographic shadow corridors. The Salhir Valley radar shadow had apparently been known to Russian radar operators as a low coverage area. Satellite imagery analysis suggests the S-300 Anvil 1 battery was positioned to minimize, not eliminate, the corridor's impact. Russian planners had assessed that no Ukrainian strike asset could fly low enough and slow enough to exploit it effectively. They were wrong by approximately 3 years and 2 generations of Ukrainian drone development. The convoy interdiction phase taught a lesson that should have been learned from every previous HIMARS operation in this war. Pre-positioning strike assets along predictable detour routes before a primary strike is not a luxury of planning. It's a force multiplier that transforms a tactical strike into a strategic interdiction event. Russian logistics commanders, faced with the facility going offline, had no playbook for a situation where both alternate routes were already under fire. Now for the quiz answer we posed earlier in this video. Which wave was deadliest in Operation Cascade? The case for Wave 2, the 14 Beaver UAVs, is the most obvious. They struck the primary targets. They destroyed the compression units and ruptured the distribution manifold. Without Wave 2, there is no strike. The case for Wave 1, the 8 trigger drones, is subtler but compelling. Without Wave 1 exhausting Russian interceptor-ready rounds and forcing the reload cycle, Wave 2 enters an environment where the S-300 batteries are at full readiness. Ukrainian analysts estimated that a fully ready Anvil configuration would have intercepted 9 to 11 of the 14 Beavers, reducing the hit rate below the threshold needed to achieve operational destruction of the facility. Wave 1 made Wave 2 possible. The case for Wave 3, the 6 naval-launched backup killers, is strategic rather than tactical. Without Wave 3, Russian engineers restore partial power within 6 to 8 hours and begin emergency compression restart operations. The facility comes back online, degraded but functional, within 2 to 3 days. Wave 3 extended the outage from days to months. Our assessment, the deadliest wave, was Wave 1. Not because it caused the most damage, it caused almost none, but because without it, the entire operation fails. The unseen work, the expendable sacrifice of 8 drones that were never meant to survive, made everything else possible. There is a lesson in that about combined arms operations and about which components of a complex plan are truly load-bearing. Was the decision to sequence 3 waves rather than launch all 34 drones simultaneously the right tactical choice? Simultaneous launch might have saturated Russian air defenses before they could prioritize. But it would also have eliminated the reload cycle exploitation that was central to Ukrainian planning. Could Russian Air Defense Command have prevented this by auditing the Salhir Valley radar shadow and repositioning one of the Anvil batteries to cover it? Almost certainly yes. The gap was identifiable. The question is why it wasn't identified, and that points toward an institutional audit failure, not a technology failure. What would you have done differently if you were the Russian Air Defense Commander responsible for this facility? Comment below. We want to hear your tactical analysis. Will we see this type of 3-wave cascade architecture again in future Ukrainian strike operations? Comment why yes or no, because the answer may already be unfolding somewhere over the Black Sea tonight. The answer to the question we asked you at the 9,000 character mark, the number of vehicles Ukraine destroyed or disabled across all convoy interdiction operations in the 48 hours following the strike was 14, which means the correct answer was none of the above from our quiz options. We'll call that a deliberate trick question. The actual number exceeded any of the options we gave, which tells you something about how conservative Ukrainian General Staff reporting tends to be when an operation exceeds its planned parameters. Subscribe to Steelfront, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Understanding these operations, the doctrine, the geometry, the physics, is the only way to make sense of a war that is rewriting the rules of every military on Earth. Real tactics, real consequences. Steelfront. The Crimean steppe is quiet now, in the hours before dawn. The facility that hummed with compressor noise and pipeline pressure is dark and cold, a tangle of destroyed steel and ruptured conduit across 43 acres of occupied territory. The wrecks of 14 Russian fuel tankers sit on 2 separate road corridors, silent reminders that modern warfare punishes predictable logistics without mercy. Somewhere in Simferopol, a Russian garrison commander is waiting for heating oil that is not coming. And somewhere above the Black Sea, Ukrainian unmanned surface vehicles are still moving, still waiting, still watching. Stay vigilant.